Good morning. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Today we are in Lesson 22 of the Gospel of Mark, and we're covering Mark chapter 11, verses 1 through 19. And this one's called, Blessed is He Who Comes in the Name of the Lord. Jesus had been to Jerusalem many times. Remember, the people of Israel were required to attend these three feasts of Moses each year. Pesach, which is Passover, Shavuot, which is weeks or Pentecost, and Sukkot, which is tabernacles. In fact, the last time we are told about Joseph in the Bible is when he and his family were in Jerusalem for Passover, 21 years earlier, and they found the 12-year-old Jesus in the temple. It is likely that these trips to Jerusalem were something Jesus looked forward to, especially as a boy. It was about a 100-mile journey and a 200-mile round trip each time they went to Jerusalem from Nazareth or from Capernaum. But this time, instead of excitement when coming to Jerusalem for another feast week, this journey came with a sense of dread. Jesus had told his disciples 3 times about what was going to occur in Jerusalem on this journey. There were no surprises waiting around the corner. Jesus knew who would betray him, knew who would try him, and knew who would crucify him. One event makes this so real. On the night of his arrest, Jesus was alone praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. He prayed for another way to accomplish this, that if there was any other way for this cup to pass from him, but only in the Father's will. In anticipation of the cross, Jesus sweated blood. We tend to focus on the physical aspect of this, and consequently, when we put ourselves in the sandals of Jesus, we might think that it was the physical pain of the scourging, the nails in his hands and feet, and the journey with the crossbeam upon his shoulders when he was completely exhausted that Jesus would be dreading the most. Instead, the most difficult part of this journey had more to do with the sins of all the world being placed upon the shoulders of Jesus. We never should lose sight of this fact. In that moment, separation occurred between Father and Son for the only time in all of eternity. Their relationship was absent temporarily. We can hear this when Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It is easy to notice that in that moment, Jesus did not refer to God as my Father. As we begin today's study, understand the burden that already exists upon the shoulders of Jesus. Within a week, he will be crucified. He knows that his time is short and does not want to miss anything that he came to accomplish. Let's read our first passage. Mark chapter 11, verses 1 through 11 says this. Now when they drew near Jerusalem to Bethphage and Bethany, at the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples, and he said to them, Go into the village opposite you, and as soon as you have entered it, you will find a colt tied, on which no one has sat. Loose it and bring it. And if anyone says to you, Why are you doing this? Say, The Lord has need of it, and immediately he will send it here. So they went their way and found the colt tied by the door outside on the street, and they loosed it. But some of those who stood there said to them, What are you doing, loosing the colt? And they spoke to them just as Jesus had commanded. So they let him go. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their clothes on it. And he sat on it. And many spread their clothes on the road, and others cut down leafy branches from the trees and spread them on the road. Then those who went before and those who followed cried out, saying, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the kingdom of our father David that comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. And Jesus went into Jerusalem and into the temple. So when he had looked around at all things, as the hour was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. When they were about 2 miles from the Mount of Olives, near Bethphage and Bethany, Jesus sent 2 of the disciples into the village with a specific purpose in mind. Jesus told them they would find a colt, the foal of a donkey there. If anyone questioned them, they should say that the master has need of it. We learn in the other Gospels that they also were instructed to bring the donkey that was mother to the colt. I wonder if the disciples were nervous, taking a couple of donkeys that were not theirs. At the same time, they had to think of the fact that Jesus knew exactly what they would find there, knew where they would find it, and knew exactly what to say to appease the owner. They had been traveling for many days from Capernaum. The only way to explain his foreknowledge of this entire situation was that he was indeed the Son of God. The disciples threw their clothes on the colt, and Jesus sat upon it. Others spread their clothes on the road, and some placed leafy branches on top of that. This was more significant than we might imagine. The Hebrew word for this kind of garment is talit, which is like a prayer shawl. Talits had no seams and 4 corners, with a tassel attached to each corner. These remind the Jewish people to follow the laws of God, the commandments of God. On the collar, most talits have Yod He Vav He, the 4 Hebrew letters that are a shortened version of Jehovah or Yahweh, the name of God. Placing these talits on the road was incredibly significant, as the people were acknowledging Jesus as the Messiah they had been waiting for. He was Messiah, High Priest, and King. The people cried out the words from this psalm. Psalm 118:26 says this, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. We have blessed you from the house of the Lord. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai." These words are also incredibly significant. We know that at the end of the Great Tribulation, the Jews will cry out these same words, and Jesus will not return until they do. In the prophetic words of Jesus concerning the end times, he said this in Matthew 23:39, "For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Many Old Testament prophecies told about the coming Messiah. Somehow the interpretation of these prophecies had become muddled. Much of that had to do with the political situation inside the nation of Israel. Israel was no longer autonomous, but instead was dwelling within their own land, but under Roman rule. The Jews became a bit tunnel-visioned, thinking that the Messiah, whom they had been waiting for, was the answer to their political problems. But God had another idea. God was more concerned with their spiritual well-being and their eternal homes than in solving a temporary political problem that existed within their land. While the Jews were looking for a conquering king, the Old Testament prophecies pointed to 2 different comings of Jesus. In his first coming, Jesus would come not in judgment, but to save the Jewish people. Salvation was his focus. In his second coming, Jesus will come in judgment. The Jewish Bible scholars had somehow missed that there were 2 different events spoken of prophetically. Their Messiah had been on this earth for 33 years, in their midst, and only in this last moment, the week before his death, did some acknowledge him as the king they had been waiting for. Sadly, some of the same people in this mob acknowledging Jesus as the King of the Jews would also be calling for his crucifixion a week later. Jesus did not change in that week, but the people were fickle. Let's read our next passage. Mark chapter 11, verses 12 through 14 says this, "Now the next day, when they had come out from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing from afar a fig tree having leaves, he went to see if perhaps he would find something on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. In response, Jesus said to it, 'Let no one eat fruit from you ever again,' and his disciples heard it." Even after being acknowledged as king, Jesus did not spend the night in Jerusalem. Instead, he slept in Bethany. Likely, this was at the home of his friends, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. In Israel, fig trees typically begin producing leaves in March or April, and then bear fruit in June. Sometimes there can be a second crop in August, and even a third crop in early December, depending on the weather. Even though this fig tree had leaves on the vine, it really wasn't time for those summer figs, as this was in the spring. Jesus was hungry, and Jesus said to the fig tree, "Let no one eat fruit from you ever again." As Jesus had the ability to stop the fig tree from producing fruit, or even to kill the fig tree, we also know that he just as easily had the power to restore the fig tree, or even to have it produce figs always. When Jesus was on earth, we only see Jesus using his power to heal people, to cast out demons, and to do miraculous things that we all would call wonderful. Interestingly, this is the only time when we see Jesus using his miraculous powers for destruction. Of course, that will happen often as the prophecies of Revelation are fulfilled. We also can see other times in the Bible when God's power causes destruction. That would include the Great Flood, the plagues of Egypt, and Sodom and Gomorrah. Months earlier, Jesus taught his disciples this parable. Luke chapter 13, verses 6 through 9 says this. He also spoke this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. Then he said to the keeper of his vineyard, "Look, for 3 years I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree and find none. Cut it down. Why does it use up the ground?" But he answered and said to him, "Sir, let it alone this year also, until I dig around it and fertilize it. And if it bears fruit, well, but if not, after that you can cut it down." Certainly these parables are connected. What does it mean to bear fruit? In a later teaching by Paul in Galatians 5, we learn of the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. As believers, these attributes should exist in our behavior, in our personalities, and in our nature. Many people think that the fig tree is a symbol of the nation of Israel. If that is the case, this judgment by Jesus upon a fig tree could be representative of his judgment of the people of Israel. Even though they had just acknowledged him as king, that was temporary. In fact, it would not last for more than a week. There are many anti-Semitic Christians who condemn Jewish people. Part of this has to do with a misunderstanding of God's purpose and plan. Jesus came to save the Jews, and that was the priority of his ministry. But when the Jews did not accept his invitation, that invitation went to the Gentiles. Obviously, all Gentiles have not turned their lives over to Jesus. In addition, we also know that God is not finished with the Jewish people yet. In the Great Tribulation, God's focus will return to the Jewish people, and 1/3 of them will accept Jesus as their Messiah. But it does seem that this judgment by Jesus upon the fig tree is symbolic of his judgment on the Jewish people for not receiving him at his first coming. We also can see that their eyes have been blinded. So for those of us who look at Jews and wonder why they can't see Jesus, it's because their eyes have been blinded. We can see another Old Testament prophecy telling us of God looking for the ripe fruit from his people in Micah chapter 7, verses 1 through 7, that says this: "Woe is me, for I am like those who gather summer fruits, like those who glean vintage grapes. There is no cluster to eat of the first ripe fruit which my soul desires. The faithful man has perished from the earth, and there is no one upright among men. They all lie in wait for blood. Every man hunts his brother with a net, that they may successfully do evil with both hands. The prince asks for gifts. The judge seeks a bribe, and the great man utters his evil desire. So they scheme together. The best of them is like a briar. The most upright is sharper than a thorn hedge. The day of your watchman and your punishment comes. Now shall be their perplexity. Do not trust in a friend. Do not put your confidence in a companion. Guard the doors of your mouth from her who lies in your bosom. For son dishonors father, daughter rises against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own household. Therefore I will look to you, the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. Jesus is the vine and we are the branches. Instead of judging those who have not received him, we should understand that we have been grafted in but are not the natural branches. Let's read the last passage today. Mark chapter 11, verses 15 through 19 says this. So they came to Jerusalem. Then Jesus went into the temple and began to drive out those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the moneychangers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry wares through the temple. Then he taught, saying to them, Is it not written, My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you've made it a den of thieves? And the scribes and chief priests heard it and sought how they might destroy him, for they feared him, because all the people were astonished at his teaching. When evening had come, he went out of the city. It is likely that Caiaphas, the Jewish high priest, was present for this event and was responsible for it taking place. The father-in-law of Caiaphas was Annas, and his 6 sons, along with his son-in-law, all took turns serving as high priest. They all were Sadducees, and they were responsible for this monetization of the temple that included overcharging for sacrifices. There were Jewish merchants present on the temple grounds who exchanged foreign currency for shekels, and Tyrian shekels were the only currency accepted to pay the temple tax. Likely the rate exchange was usury. Each year, Jewish men 20 years and older were to pay a half shekel temple tax to the temple in Jerusalem. This tax was instituted by Moses in Exodus 30, verses 11 through 16. The cost was either a Tyrian shekel for 2 people or a half shekel for 1 person. We can see that when this tax is due, Jesus instructed Peter to catch a fish, and inside the fish there would be a shekel to pay this tax for them both. In Matthew 17, verses 24 through 27. The shekels came from Tyre, and it is thought that these also were the silver coins paid to Judas Iscariot by the Jewish religious leadership to betray Jesus. Notice that Jesus was not offended based on how this affected him, but for how it affected his Father. Many Christians claim to emulate this behavior and call it righteous anger, but that becomes increasingly difficult with the fact that we are not righteous. Jesus saw the temple as a place of prayer, while the Jewish people saw the temple more as a place of sacrifice. It would seem that prayer could not be monetized, but certainly Catholics monetized prayer by selling indulgences in the Middle Ages. Basically, by this process, a person could pay a priest to pray their deceased loved ones from purgatory into heaven. Not very scriptural, but at least it made money. I'm equally uncomfortable with the monetization of the Bible. While pastors should be paid, as we do not muzzle the ox when it is treading out the grain, at the same time, this always seems a bit problematic. Motive becomes the delineating line. When a pastor teaches with a priority of income, it is highly likely that he also will begin to try to figure out which messages inspire more giving. It sure is simpler to spread the gospel for free, simply because that is the gift that God has given. But here we are in the last week of the ministry of Jesus upon this earth, and certainly he is not charging for his words or healings. It would have been so difficult to endure what Jesus endured, but I think that it was even more difficult knowing everything that was to occur before it happened. He must have loved us an awful lot. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Have a blessed day.